But I think virtually everybody here knows and is familiar with Cal's work over the years as a longtime columnist for Stereophile, the Music in the Round column previously, and now he's a general reviewer. And I for one, have been a big fan of his writing and his perspectives. So we're very fortunate to have him joining in. I prompted this by a thread on What's Best Forum. I put the link on our website talking about subs and line level versus speaker level, which I was always curious about. And as a master of multi-channel music, probably with subs as well, I thought that would be an interesting topic. But we'll veer off from there on whatever everybody wants to talk about.
Alan, can I say something before you start?
Sure.
Yeah, about the COVID-19. I was reading somewhere where, mostly all, like over 90% of the people that die from the COVID are over 60, which pretty much hits us all. And what I've been doing to try to, like we all know that we lost Mike Chafee to, who frequented a gym, or a fitness center. And the fitness center that I go to, I took a carbon dioxide meter over there, and their carbon dioxide was, like, I think around 13, something like 13 parts per million, which 13, carbon dioxide is not a poisonous gas, but from air conditioning experience I have in the past, that's what air conditioned people use, the carbon dioxide readings, to see if they have enough air circulation in the building. And a lot of these new buildings don't have air circulation because they're trying to cut down on the energy loss because, like, maybe being green or whatever. And you can pick up a fairly inexpensive carbon dioxide meter off of Amazon for like $50 or something. It'll give you, a pretty close reading that you can take with you when you go to places that you're skeptical about. If you go to a restaurant, say, or a fitness center like I used it for.
That's a good idea. Interesting.
Yeah. Look, you're looking for a reading, preferably be low 7 parts per million. That shows good air quality. Between 7 and 10 is average, and over 10 is considered poor. So I thought I'd throw that out there because we're all susceptible.
Yeah. Well, my fitness center is my home. Walking and biking again soon, and that's interesting. Thank you, Ronnie. All right, Cal. I'll let you start off with any comments you'd like to make. And if everybody can mute themselves unless you're speaking, that'd be helpful.
Well, a lot of the questions that came in early were about subwoofers and setting them up, and I got to tell you, I fooled around with them back when, many, many years ago, and I never achieved anything that I was comfortable with. It always stuck out. It did some things right, but it wasn't right most of the time. And then when I got into multi-channel, where you say, well, it's obvious that you'd use subwoofers in multi-channel. Even then, I just stayed away from subwoofers. I stuck with full range speakers everywhere and avoided them. And it was only when I became really comfortable with multi-channel that I acknowledged that there were other issues that might be worth pursuing with subwoofers. And my thoughts about them have evolved over time. And I think it's kind of a moving target. A lot of things change in terms of the tools you have and how people approach it. And one of the problems was that the original uses were just to add more extension to the bottom end. And that was the piece of cake. And you could always do that. The question is how well you can get it integrated. That initial experience was I don't know if you remember, I guess this crowd remembers, I had the Stax electrostatics, and they were sort of briefly the competitor to quads, came and went, but they had no bass. They started rolling off at 160 hertz. They were so nice above that you just wanted to love them and you wanted to use them. And the only way I could get them to even cross over well into a sub was to EQ the hell out of the stacks itself. It just wouldn't play nice. And so it was one of the many experiences I had that were frustrating. And what's happened recently in the last couple of years, is thinking less in terms of extending the bass so much, which you can do, but in dealing with the bass a little bit better. Instead of just taking a speaker that, I got to admit, I don't use small floor stand-mounted speakers, but even floor-mounted speakers, many of them just don't have a real, the monitor audio ones I have in Connecticut, you know, they're nice. They're nominally full range, but they really don't have a lot of strong bass. If you listen to music or, you know, movies, but just sticking with music, they just don't have the bottom end for full orchestral stuff played at levels they're capable of, but they can't create enough weight in the room. They go down far enough. They just don't load the room. And my feeling about subwoofers these days has evolved to the point where I think of them more as a better way of providing bass in a room than just simply extending the low frequencies, which they, of course, can do. And that's why I've also become more of a fan of multiple subwoofers and of integration of multiple subwoofers. In fact, some of them with relatively high crossovers, because if you have multiple ones, they become non-directional higher up, in effect, rather than having
Gary?
First of all, how big a room?
Well,
we're looking at it.
This room it's really 3 rooms connected. So the main room is 15 by 25 approximately. And then it's open into a dining room and into an entry foyer, which is, I'm looking at that now. So my back is to the listening part of the room.
Okay, and when you say it doesn't play nice with your main speakers, what is the audible effect that you're talking about?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that was the case here. That was a generalization from before, when I was using a single subwoofer. But I had that here also. The first time I got a subwoofer in this room, it was a nice one of the JL Audios, the F113. And I could get it well integrated with the front speakers, but for multi-channel, it didn't work right. It wasn't a question of just adjusting the crossover point. Putting something like that at one boundary of the room endowed it with a spatial characteristic due to the room modes. I mean, you can walk around a room, you know that sounds different in different places. And this thing was sitting in one place, and it had a characteristic. If you move it to another place, the bass shifted a little bit.
Yeah, mine always sounds too heavy. Like no matter how low I turn it, it sort of takes over. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it becomes a distinct and separate contributor. It's never part of the spectrum or the source the way it should be. Yeah.
I've never seen a chart, or it's from somebody that sells subwoofers or somewhere, that tells how big or how powerful a sub you need for so many cubic feet of room. Do you know of any such a thing?
No, I'm sure if you asked the vendors, they'd have numbers, but those may not be based on anything but marketing. So I don't know the answer.
I would think it also depends on the geometry of the room. You know, if like my problem that I've dealt with is I happen to have a null smack in my main listening position and I can't get over that. That's why I'm going with multiple subs, trying to smooth it out a bit. But a lot of it depends on where your main listening position is, the speakers, and how it interacts with the room. You can have 2 same rooms of the same cubic feet that have totally different performance at the listening position.
Yeah, I mean, I have a corner here in this room. It's to my, from your perspective, it would be to the right and behind you, behind the view. To my left and in front of me. And I noticed that when I moved into this apartment a number of years ago, and I put my equipment rack over there, So I would go over there, and while I'm fiddling with things, I would always hear this huge low end in that spot. And then when I went back to sitting down and listening to music, of course, it was different. And since I didn't spend a lot of time there, it wasn't the problem that it was intensified in that spot. But I know what it's telling me is that the bass is not evenly distributed in the room. Right now, I have a sub in that corner. One of the subs in the array is sitting in that spot, and it makes a very nice contribution along with the others. I really couldn't say. I mean, I've tested the subs one at a time. I've tested them in pairs, and when I got to 3, fortunately, I was able to stop. And I got a bass that integrated well. I used the 3 of them. And I've been running them now, even though the studios are fairly decent bass reproducers. I'm running at a crossover around 95 hertz. Because in a sense, if you think that you can get good non-directional bass out of a bunch of subs, you'd like it to do as much of the bass as possible, because it's now not identifiable. Well, you know, the premise always is that you start at 80 hertz crossover because that's when pure tones become non-directional. Well, with an array, the bets are different. You're going to say you can get a non-directional bass sound higher up, and you might as well take advantage of it. And that's what I've found here in this room. But as you know, it is not something that you can apply to just every room. But this room only has 3 corners, and that's pretty much where I have the subs.
Have you, I guess you use an external crossover to blend them in. Have you ever run your mains full range and then dialed in the subs just to fill in a little bit extra?
I did that when I had 1 sub. And because I found that was easier to manage, even though it wasn't entirely successful, it was better than the crossover with the single sub, where I always noticed it was being there. With the single sub, letting my speakers run full range and just, you know, putting this in occasionally, it did things when I wanted it. You know, put on something like, you know, the SAS on third or other things with really deep bass, and it adds a you know, a physical element to the sound that you don't get with the 2 speakers. But going with the multiple array, it does that, but it sounds better as a general sound field than the speakers do by themselves, because they're, you know, after all, we put these speakers in the best place for imaging and soundstage, and they're kind of random almost for bass. I mean, you pay attention to that. If it's a really bad spot, you got to think of alternatives. But for imaging and soundstage, you optimize it. You get that center imaging to snap in, and it's fine. But you have to take with it the fact that it's kind of a catch-can with catching out the bass end, putting more into the subs, which a subarray that is already non-directional is an easy way to get more of the better bass from the whole system.
Gary?
What are you running the signal through? A multi-channel receiver or some fancy high-end equipment?
Nothing actually. I have no preamp and no receiver. I run.
There's your problem right there.
Yeah. I run everything from my server into a DAC or DACs. I have a couple of them, and those feed the power amps. Right now, I'm using a JL Audio CR1 for the array of subs, but that's temporary. I think I can do better, because I can do the bass management in my server.
Well, what is doing the surround sound processing?
No processing. I use multi-channel sources.
You mean so discrete multi-channel?
Yeah. I can do processing. I mean, look, I'm running J River on my server, and I can up mix stereo as well as down mix, and it plays DTS and Dolby and all the other stuff that an ordinary processor would do. Those conversions are built in, but mostly all of the multi-channel I listen to is discrete multi-channel sources.
Okay, may I offer an observation?
Sure, please.
From the field. One of the biggest advances, I just got a new receiver.
Oh,
Biggest advance that I've found in multi-channel is this object-based audio processing.
right.
They can kind of move sound images between speakers almost at will. Like if a sound is supposed to be from the left front top something or other, they'll put signal into the left speaker and the Atmos speaker in the front left. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you wouldn't have that if you don't have a processor that does that.
That's true. I'm using a 5.1 array here. I'm setting up for a much more elaborate system in the house in Connecticut, but it's not there yet. But I have to say there isn't that much music on Atmos yet. That's another issue. Somebody asked about the future of multi-channel. I think that the immersive format that you're referring to are the future of multi-channel. And I think the reason that they're future has a lot to do with the fact that they're single source for all system formats. In other words, you can play them in stereo, you can play them in 5.1, you can play them in as many channels as you have. And that makes it much easier for this distribution. And I suspect it's easier for the licensing and royalties. It's a single file rather than multiple format files that go into, say, excuse me, an SACD or the old DVDAs, where they were considered separate releases, and artists, or rather their agents, insisted on separate licensing for each of the formats. But yeah, I think that that's a coming thing. I can't imagine doing more than 5.1 or 7.1 in this room here. And so I'm constrained about that, and I'm not planning on going farther, but I'm putting in 4 height channels in the house in Connecticut in the coming weeks.
Are you talking home theater or just purely music?
Well, in Connecticut, it's both. Here,
I would think that it lends itself better to home theater movies, but maybe live or recordings of concerts. But pure music, I think, will be a very limited niche.
well, you know, multi-channel music's always been a niche so far, but I don't know about that. I got to tell you, what motivated me to do this was a pure music recording. It was the remastering and the Atmos mixing or mastering of the Von Karajan Beethoven series from the mid-70s. And I mean, that's a recording that those of us who are interested in that repertoire know well. And I was glad to see it remastered, and they did it in 5.1. It was pretty good. But when I played it with the high channels, which I had a temporary setup then, all of a sudden it sounded much more like being there at the concert hall than you got from the limited channels in the one horizontal plane. So that was what converted me. And I said, as we see Atmos is, and similar codecs that we're talking about, because the DTSX and the Oro also do these things, or similar things. I want to be able to enjoy the music that's being released in those formats in the best possible way. I had a similar experience. It goes back perhaps 10 years. There was this abortive effort that Harman made at a new format, a new system processing. They showed a demo of it at CES. And then Harman went into its depression, which it did for a couple of years. before it reorganized and got swallowed. But the point is, one of the things they did was they played recordings with a high channel, and you could get a much better sense of the place than you got with only speakers in the horizontal plane. And I was quite struck by that. But that was just a demo. It was experimental, and I let it pass. And when the product never came to fruition, that was the end of it. But I have probably a half dozen Atmos releases of music only that I don't listen to here in New York much, but I listen to them in Connecticut, or I'm looking forward to listening to them again in Connecticut when the other stuff arrives. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a future there, and I think that the Atmos and those formats are going to be an important player in music. There's no reason for them not to be.
What format do those Atmos and full height music recordings come in? Is it just a DVD, Blu-ray?
The Blu-ray. So try the Abbey Road one. The Abbey Road has a couple of.
Interesting.
I'm not as big on pop music because, well, that's a personal thing. But I'm in terms of the audio, I sort of don't have a reference for pop music. You can do anything you want with it that the producer and the musician wants, and I have no objections to that. But when I listen to classical music, I have a reference. I expect it to sound, or I hope it's going to sound like a real live performance in a real acoustical space. And the additional
very interesting. It's funny because I'm in the process of getting a new receiver, and I was contemplating getting getting the top of the line new Anthem that offers like 11 or 14 channels. I forget. I may have to go that route to have that future capability. AJ, question? AJ?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute. Going back to what Cal was saying about crossing over at 95 hertz, but actually liking classical music over pop, which popular music is mainly monophonic, monotype bass.
Yep.
But classical music is not. Classical music, I'm sure you know, at concert halls can have spatial aspects to it that cannot possibly be reproduced in mono. So how do you reconcile being a classical fan but having mono bass up to 95 hertz? And you were talking about localization. You were talking about bass being non-directional. Well, all frequencies are non-directional as far as the driver size goes until it becomes small relative to the driver. So non-directional applies for even higher frequencies. But in terms of localization, 80 hertz, 90 hertz, you said 95. Yes, you can localize above that. But lateralization, which is the ability to perceive interaural phase differences, can extend down below that. And so I'm a bit surprised that you run your subs that high, being a classical guy.
Yeah, well, I did it as an experiment, and it's been pretty satisfying. It's not the final system I'm going to do here, so there's more experimenting going. I did it at the suggestion of the guys from JL when I was doing the review with the subs, and I've decided that I can do better with multiple subs, but not having them as a mono source.
Right. There's no question that mono will give you smoother amplitude.
Yeah.
And make a microphone happy. There's a big, I think that's probably the biggest source of confusion on audio forums and amongst audiophiles. What is the difference between what a microphone sees and what two ears and a brain hear? And Floyd Toole is very, very clear on that a microphone cannot possibly tell you what two ears. It gives you information, but it's not the same thing.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's also that you're not, we talk about, when we listen with our ears and our brain. And by analogy, the microphone is giving you an electrical signal, and what we see from the microphone is how we process that signal, what parameters we extract from it. We get, you know, you can look at it in a frequency responsive time issues. You can look at other things, but you're right. What the microphone transduces is a different process and a different transfer function than what an ear, to say nothing of two ears, that what an ear does. Especially as the ear is adaptive as well. So it's not doing the same thing all the time during a particular sampling.
Right. So I don't mean to keep going here, but you know John Atkinson, of course.
Yeah.
He has heard James Johnson's perceptual sound field reconstruction system, and that is not mono bass.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, it's 5 channels. It has no heights, but yet you can hear stuff reflecting off the ceiling from the concert hall. So yeah. Again, I'm with you that you have to go with the most popular type formats like Atmos, which of course Alan was saying is it mainly for movies, but Amazon and Tidal are both going to be offering Atmos music.
Yes.
Tidal currently, I think Amazon suckered me in. I haven't seen any way to get it other than with an Alexa or some nonsense like that.
Yes, that's the problem. Yeah.
But it is going to be a music format, Alan.
Yes.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes, and so and everybody has a multi-channel system for movies.
Yeah.
It is, as Cal will attest to, it is much better also at reproducing music multi-channel, especially classical and that sort of stuff. Pop, not so much, maybe, but classical, yes.
Yeah, and you know, and it's, as far as I know, the channels are, especially the ones in the horizontal plane, are full range channels. So one could extract directional bass from those. One doesn't have to use the so-called LFE channel at all.
Are you talking about the PSR system, or just in
no?
general?
I'm just talking about in general.
I'm talking
about Atmos or the DTSX or those are full range channels. And if you're going to process this through something where you've extracted those channels and you decide where you're going to send them, there's no reason why one could not conceivably take bass from those directional, those full range channels, which have directionality,
yes,
assuming that they were mixed that way, right. And create directional bass. But in fact, my plan is to have completely discrete channels for bass coming off my process. Well, it's, as I say, it's a PC processor where I could extract the bass from different channels to different subs, and EQ and integrate them with instruments and with the ear so that I can have directional bass and still have multiple sounds, because even though they're directional, they are still part of the same sound field. And they're not completely independent in that regard, or should they be?
Jerry?
I think I have an observation. It's not so much whether the bass is directional in the original concert hall, but whether it's stereo bass is observable in a home room. I'm thinking no, and mono bass is good enough, but I'd like a comment from AJ on that.
It depends on the room, of course, and it depends on the layout and the modal excitement. There's a lot of factors. It turns out that if you have monophonic source or monopole sources that maximally excite all the modes, you may miss some of the spatial information than if you use, say, a more of a velocity source like a dipole. You've heard of people saying, "Oh, fantastic dipole bases" and all that sort of thing. There's studies. I can send you the AES link, Gary. Are you a member, by the way? Are you an AES member?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll send you a compilation link done by Meridian back in like 2007 or 8, where they compiled about 50 different bass studies, and some of them were how other studies missed things because they were using monopole subwoofers instead of cardioids or dipole velocity sources that had less modal excitement and missed some of the spatial information that was there in the bass. So, but bottom line is, you don't want to get it too complicated. I mean, a lot of times in your room, you can't have 10 subwoofers. You can have maybe 2 or 3. You have 1, Gary, so that's a non-starter. You have to have more.
I've got 2, but they're with a mono-based signal.
Right. Well, and again, it comes down to what are you listening to? If you're listening to primary classical music, that's no good. If you're listening to movies and pop, then you're probably fine. Go with smooth amplitude with an EQ and should be okay.
Yep.
I'm happy.
I'm gonna veer off for just a second, just to get back to what started my whole thought process of getting Cal in for a meeting was basically addressing the difference between line level versus speaker level subwoofer hookup. Is there any difference, anything we ought to consider, pros and cons?
Oh, I don't know. I think that I don't know if there's any really good justification. Maybe I'll get booze. Good justification for line level, given the general availability of subs. I mean, there are subs that come without amplifiers, but they're very rare in this day and age, and they're specialty items in a sense. But the argument that I keep hearing for line level bass is that you want to be able to carry over the tonal
I think you
quality.
mean speaker level. I think you mean speaker level, not line level is RCA.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Level.
Yes. Yeah. The argument for speaker level is that you want to be able to maintain the same tonal characteristic of your amplifier and system into the bass. And I don't really buy that, because I think what you're trying, at least what I'm trying to do, is get rid of any tonal character from the amplifier. And if your speaker has tonal character, inevitably they all have some, there's no reason to have it in the subwoofer and have that end of the spectrum colored by it. I think it's probably minimal, but that's the argument that's often given. But then you also have the problem that if you want to use speaker level output from your main amplifiers, tap it off or something, is you give up a lot of options for how you can EQ the sub and the main speakers together. They become interactive, and there are fewer tools that will deal with it. I mean, Vandersteen and Rel are sort of, tangents off the mainstream, and they have their own systems, and I have no experience with either one of them, so I won't say anything negative about them. But I don't think it's going in the right direction. I think the right direction is a powered sub or a non-powered sub with an amplifier. It's the same thing, so that it can be fed a line level signal from something that will process the signal to make it integrate with the rest of the system in the room.
Actually, Mikhail, let me go to Mikhail, then we'll go to you, Gary.
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Mikhail?
Yeah, can you hear me or not? For some reason.
Yeah, we hear you.
Can you hear me? Thank you. And the one argument I heard about speaker level integration is that there's some amplifiers have built-in delays, mostly digital ones. So if you integrate an amplifier level, then you don't have any delays in a chain, even a millisecond. And those delays can kind of move the phase and recordings or whatever. That's the argument I heard. I'm not sure how valid it is, but
I question whether how much power amplifier delay, unless it's doing some kind of other processing, is really minimal compared to the acoustic dimensions and spaces where the air moves. It's a different scale of magnitude, and I don't think that holds water.
Yeah, but that was in the literature of REL, so
I mean, people come up with reasons for things, and sometimes the reasons make no sense, but the system works anyway.
But I have another question. I know it's not your forte, but what's your experience integrating subwoofers with analog systems? So when your source is most of it vinyl records or tape recordings.
I'm just sure I heard the whole question. You want is something about can you repeat it?
The question was about integration with analog system, not digital.
Right.
So when the source is vinyl records or tape, and especially vinyl records, they often, their low-level information is even less than most of digital recording.
I think that there's a problem with analog sources like vinyl and tape in terms of integrating them with other processing, since you come up with the necessity of running them into an A to D conversion. It's not fatal, and if you can split it up and do something in the analog domain for your main speakers, and then still do a digital EQ, whatever else, to deal with the subwoofers, that might be a way to do it. Those things are not, again, they're not standard things. People can do those, and I know people who've done them. There are devices that you can run an analog signal through for the main speakers, but they're not as precise for room EQ, especially at the low end, as a digital signal. So you may want to have a sort of a hybrid system, run analog all the way through the main system, set up something with a reasonably controlled roll off at a particular frequency with particular characteristics that can be done, and then have the subwoofer come in, or subwoofers be tapped off at the line level, A to D converted, processed, and then integrated with what you have. You don't have the facility you'd have with an old digital system, but I guess it could be done. I really have no experience with that, but I mean, I guess I did a long time ago, but only very briefly.
John Shape.
Yes, thank you. To give you an example in my system, it's pretty complicated, and I integrate 6 subwoofers at different frequencies, up front and behind. And when I integrate these subwoofers, I use everything to try to integrate them. In other words, I use delay, I use phase differences. I actually go with David Griesinger's suggestion of putting one subwoofer out of phase 90 degrees so it doesn't load the room as much. And then when I get my final product, I can usually get it within plus or minus, let's say, 3 to 5 dB, so I can get it flat.
Yeah.
So when you were talking, you said, I don't know if you said you use the delay at all to integrate, or how do you integrate? Do you use like the switch? Like I have a switchblade. I have a Behringer unit that's like a, it's like a switchblade. I mean, it's got all these blades on it, and you can do what you need to do. But how do you integrate it? What process do you use to integrate?
Well, my system, at least here, is so far relatively simple. This is a mono bass system in this room at this point. So all I need is I set them up so that they are in phase. I don't use the 90%, 90-degree shift. I set them up so they're in phase. I check them out in pairs, three pairs that I could check and get them so that they are in phase and they are level. They're running at the same level. They're similar speakers, and then I EQ them. At the present time, using the EQ in the JL sub that's daisy chained to the other 2 subs. So it's one EQ. It's an 18-band EQ, and it really flattens it out. And it flattens it out very nicely. But most of the flattening is accomplished simply by having multiple subs. Before you even get to the EQ,
definitely.
you're already got 75 to 90% of the game done. And that took a lot of adjusting. It also took a lot of experimenting with positioning. I had started out with one sub, which I thought was the perfect spot in terms of geometric balance. And when that sub was listened to with the others, either of the other two or all three together, it just simply pulls the bass image, playing just tones, way to the side of the room. Just the spatial interaction between that one and the other two, even though they all look pretty good by themselves. And there was nothing I could do with that one except move it. And you would think that, you know, moving something about 6-8 feet would not have that huge effect at the lowest frequencies, but it did, because of the modal distribution in the room, which I can't quite visualize. Yeah. So that's what I'm using here, which is a pretty straightforward consumer type arrangement. That is to say, it's not anything that a do-it-yourselfer, and I mean that not necessarily in terms of building a box or a circuit, but in terms of configuring a complex system. It's not something that a do-it-yourselfer would have, but someone who is committed to getting something out of a system with off-the-shelf componentry.
How do you dial in the phase? What are you measuring or using for that? That's a big challenge for a lot of us.
Well, I measure it in with respect to the other subs. Okay. And I do that by watching frequency sweeps and adjusting.
Using which software?
What?
Using which measurement software?
I usually use OmniMic for that, because it's very easy to just set it to repeat the tone and it just runs. I mean, it drives my wife crazy, but you know, it just runs for.
That's the idea.
Anyway, so I use that, but there's no reason why you can use REW for it just as well, because it'll do that. But this works. It's convenient for me. I also like it because it's easy to set up. It's inherently multi-channel, and so I can switch from channel to channel. And I just run them together and adjust one against the other so I can get them to work together.
Okay.
Someone hollering?
I think it was Ramchan. Ramchan, unmute. Were you trying to say something?
Okay.
Sorry,
Gary.
Alan,
Okay.
you did see the thread with myself and Cal about RU and the multi-mic measurement system that you can simultaneously measure all the subs, you know, all the frequency, all at once.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you mean that new array from Mini DSP?
Right, but it's going to use the RU software, so it's a package.
Yes, it is.
You won't be able to use it with other software. So RU is going to have a package where you buy the U-Mic X or something like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's up to 6 or 8. I can't remember how many you can use, but each of those things, those rectangles, is 4 microphones.
Right.
So you're spatially averaging about the size of a head. That's why it's about that size.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we were talking about, measuring smooth, you're measuring smooth to the tip of a microphone, but that doesn't mean that if you move it a couple inches here that it's going to give you the same thing. So this will give you a spatial average about the size of your head, which is good.
And right now it's set up, as far as I know, to handle 4 arrays or 16 channels.
Yeah, I wonder how consumer friendly that will be. It sounds, plus if you want to measure multiple listening positions to average out the response, I guess you still got to move it. Does it have the capability of doing multiple sweeps from multiple locations?
I'm sure REW can do that.
It's multiple microphones. So each rectangle is 4 microphones, but you can get 4 of those rectangles. So you place them, you know, where the main seat is, and then maybe off to the sides where you have multiple seats in, for example, a home theater, and then you can measure all at once.
Yeah, I asked them. I asked Tony Rouget about this, about the possibility of integrating that with a central mic or central array, so that you could have a reference center and then a symmetrical distribution of these arrays around it. And he said it's theoretically possible you could have a regular microphone in the middle, which is useful for measuring or as a reference for distance and timing. in most of the multi-channel systems. You take your reference right at the head region. And of course, you could use another array there, but then I want an odd number of arrays.
I've never been able to figure out the relevance of that, because once again, yes, I get that you have a point where the left, right, you know, the signal processing is going to have a reference point.
Yes.
But psychoacoustically, what does that add up to? I mean, your head will never be at that reference point. You still have two ears. So your system is calibrating to that to get differences between the left, right, the timing and all that. But
yes.
But you're making a microphone happy, not 2 ears. So I've never been able to figure out that.
Well, that's why I said the alternative is to have another array in the middle, but you need then an odd number so that you can have a symmetrical distribution of them around the central point. Yeah.
A quick question. Cal, you mentioned the Omni mic and REW will do phase measurements, because I have XTZ Room Analyzer, which doesn't. So I guess I need to switch over to REW to actually help dial in phase with my setup.
Well, I haven't unpacked the XTZ box in a while, so I can't recall. I got to tell you.
No, it doesn't have phase. No, it just shows the frequency response.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for that.
What's that?
What are you hearing? You're hearing primarily amplitude, and so measuring phase, it gives you information, but what you really want is relatively smooth amplitude, and not smooth microphone happy amplitude, but smooth perceptually. And so that means free of peaks. Don't obsess about dips. Your ears can't hear it. The microphone can see it, but your ears can't necessarily hear unless it's a very wide Q dip. So you know, go easy on the EQ. Worry less about phase and worry more about getting a relatively smooth, but not super smooth, just free of peaks.
Yeah, and I may have misled you, Alan, before when I was talking about adjusting phase. I was adjusting it by looking at frequency response. In other words, I would be running sweeps through two subs, adjusting the phase on one of them so that I got the smoothest frequency response from the pair. Okay.
Right, that's what I do with XTZ. Look at the crossover point more or less and use that to where I can get the smoothest response, because phase, of course, is frequency dependent.
Yeah, but if you're integrating subs, you would not just use the crossover, you use the entire low frequency range.
Phase is simply the inverse of frequency. So it's not this totally separate thing. It's just the inverse of frequency. So concentrate more on frequency, free of peaks. Don't put it at one point and try to beat it smooth there, because that's not going to be any good for your ears. Good for the microphone. Move it around a little bit and kind of average and cut down the peaks, and you should be fine.
I think it's a good idea though to look at a waterfall plot also, because that kind of lets you know how long the bass stays in the room. And we've had it where we were at Mike Bows's house and we were just doing the frequency. We were just doing the frequency response. And I said, well, we need to do the waterfall too. And we ended up actually moving it, and it wasn't quite as flat as a certain point, but the waterfall was better and the sound was better, because the bass didn't hang around as much. You know, that's the problem with the waterfall. It can just keep going, you know, and it's like this droning, you know, so.
Yeah, you want a tighter bass and not have it basically rattling around and continuing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once you dial something in that you think looks right with whatever tool you're using, it's always a good idea to look at what you've got from another tool just to see if something's sticking out. So that running a waterfall after you, for example, adjust the relative phase of a pair of subs, you also want to see what they're doing in time.
Very important. Gary?
From that point of view, you can measure an awful lot of stuff. You don't necessarily know what that results in the sound. Sometimes a test record is the best way to find out if you've succeeded in something, whether it's home theater or just stereo. I wonder if there are any really clever new test records in surround sound, or that somebody has found?
You mean musical selections or noises?
Everything. Of course, there's always frequency response and bass integration and all that. Maybe surround signals. I've got the Spears audio and video test recording for 4K and HD. It has both audio and video in it, but it's not all that helpful.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are some that cover some of these more sophisticated topics that you're trying to make measurements and figure out whether that'll sound better or not. A test record is the fastest way to an answer sometimes.
Yeah, I tend not to listen to test records much. I mean, I have, you know, the library. I'm sure you each have a library of things that you pull out when you say, oh, well, I got to hear how this sounds. And I have a selection of them also. It shifts from time to time. But there are things where you have expectations and you want to be surprised when you do something new. And you want to be surprised in a good way.
Usually if it sounds any different, you think it sounds better.
Excuse me?
If it sounds any different, audiophiles always think that any difference is an improvement.
Yeah, I know. And I have to say that no matter how experienced you are, you're susceptible to that. But the thing is that if it sounds different and then it continues to sound different in a particular way with everything, you know it's something wrong. It should, and I've had situations, and I'm sure each of you had that too, where something does entice you. You listen to it and say, boy, I listened to that. I haven't heard that before. And then you realize that it's something that's sticking out that shouldn't be. And while you may hear something, that's why when people say, I heard this recording, it sounds, you know, I haven't heard this detail before. Maybe you weren't supposed to hear that detail. There was a review I read many decades ago that was a critique of some of I think it was the Schulte recording of Salome, which was just a brilliant stereo recording, and I still think it's a fantastic recording and sound. And the reviewer said that he heard all kinds of detail in the music that he had never heard before. And someone said, well, you're not supposed to hear those kinds, you're supposed to be swept away by it. And not those things. If you're paying attention to the details, you're missing the picture. And if the details do that, it's wrong. So I don't think that there's a surefire answer to that question. It comes with time, and you know, we all devote a lot of time to these things. And I listen to recordings. I have things that join my common test group, and others that leave, and some that come back, and some sounds, some ambient sounds that I have that I listen to for naturalness. But I don't think there's any way you could make a decision based on one or two test recordings. You've got to listen to a lot of stuff, because we're too fallible, and we can't rely on one test at one time and make that decisive.
I think Phil wants to chime in.
Too. One of the interesting things that I found is after I tweak my system in whatever method I use, I go back and I sweep a sine wave from DC to daylight just to hear what it is that is telling me in way of information at my ears.
Yes.
Have you ever done that?
Yeah, I've done that. And I've done other things like pink noise occasionally. But first of all, it's hard to spend much time with that. You just want to check to see if something's wrong with that. But most of the time, I go back to a battery of whatever is my current battery of favorites for sound in a particular 6-month period. It's a shifting group, and listen for things. And I'm not looking to hear something new. I'm looking to hear something better. that I already know is there. And if something really is strikingly different, that's usually, it's like torch mode on TVs in the store. You see this where there's too much contrast, too much brightness. It's not what you want, but it's what sells TVs in the store. And I think that a sweep of frequency response or something like pink noise is a way of saying, of listening to it and seeing if something is wrong. It should be smooth. Nothing should stand out. If it does, then that's a clue that you have to look further into it.
Yeah, because
My favorite stuff is if you listen to piano, applause, human voice. That pretty much, if those sound natural, you're pretty much in there.
The sinusoid will allow you to hear phase differences, though, because everybody's familiar with what phase differences can and do sound like. And when you sweep low frequency phase differences, it's not a null. It's a definite incorrect phase being represented at your ears at that particular frequency. It's very interesting.
So you're measuring that, Phil, or just listening?
No, I'm just listening to it.
Yeah, it sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I just listen to it, and I listen for these null points, and then I try to speculate. Okay, so where is this particular null point or resonant point coming from, and how can I address that?
One of the interesting things, speaking of resonance, the Martin Logan balanced 4 subs have a button that generates a full frequency sweep in the bass region. I think it goes maybe up to 200, or I'm not sure exactly. And you can hear resonance in the room. You can hear the smoothness of the bass throughout that whole frequency response, which is very telling. And it bothers me because I can never get it even close to being smooth across the spectrum.
Well,
That's kind of what I was trying to get at is we've strayed off. In the bass, anybody should be able to tell whether you have bass problems. You don't have to be an audiophile. You don't need a reference recording. If you have bass boom and you have bass resonant, you have bass overhang, you're going to hear that. When you get past the bass and you're talking about all the other stuff, you're in the circle of confusion. You'll never know exactly what it's supposed to sound like, even in the bass. But everything else, you'll never know exactly what it's supposed to sound like. So you start chasing your tail there. But stepping back to the bass, it should be fairly easy to tell by your ears whether you have, peaks and booms and all that kind of stuff. And whether you know exactly what the recording is supposed to sound like. You never will, but you should be able to hear problems.
Yeah.
How many people have a recording where they were actually at a performance where that was recorded? So they have the memory, the audio memory of the actual performance versus the recording. Gary and AJ and Jeff.
We all do. What's his name's house? Al Lung.
Al Lung's with the piano and cello.
We did the recording in situ and then went downstairs and listened to it on his stereo, remember?
And it sounded very good.
Don't we have that on the website somewhere?
Yes, we have that. And Gary, Gary recorded it. You recorded it. We also had
little did you know, Cal, we had a live piano recording, 2 digital and an analog version. Phil did the analog, Gary and I did the digital, and was it a pianist and a cellist, wasn't it? Alan came in and we all sat and listened to the live recording. Live performance. We recorded it, and then we went downstairs and listened to it back on his quad system.
And it sounded very good, very close to what we heard upstairs. Right?
Didn't we do that at your house, Alan, with recording in the piano and then below the piano? Didn't we?
Right, we did that as well, comparing the different mic setups with Gary and Phil as well.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that was tough.
The best sounding one was the one with the microphone inside the piano. I remember that. That was interesting.
Yeah,
I record all the time.
Unfortunately, my understanding is our memory for what we hear is not very long. So that when we do A/B comparisons, it's very difficult to do that correctly because we can't remember it very well. That's what I've read.
Yes, that's certainly true.
Just 1 second, Gary. I was going to say the Florida Orchestra now is doing their live stream, and you can watch it for free. But their opening concert now, which was from a Hoffey theater with a limited audience, but it was streamed live. I played it back on my system live, and having been to the Florida Orchestra numerous times, it was good, but it wasn't live. I didn't have the palpable sensations and the room effects that I'm used to. And all that might have been their mics and the setup, but you can stream those for live at no charge. It'll be an interesting way to hear it in the system.
It's called stereo.
Yeah.
You can't compare what you hear in your room to what you heard live in a large, huge room.
Yeah.
But
Big
I
difference.
record all the time, and then I come home and mix it and play it on my system. I prefer the recording.
Yeah. Well, you know, the recordings are also, you know, you talk that circle of confusion, you know, how they're mic'd and how they're recorded can emphasize the sense of being there, sometimes at the expense of other features. I mean, I've heard some really poor recordings that have a liveliness because of the way that it has sound of the hall, the ambience, and mixed in at a reasonable balance that makes them so exciting and seemingly excellent sounding recordings. But if you listen carefully to the actual music that's there, it's not particularly well recorded, but you get another feature. So I think that, you know, the aliveness can be a separate thing from the quality of the actual sound of the instruments and the voices.
Yeah, you can have a poor recording that's very dynamic, that sounds live.
Yeah, sure. That's another example of it.
I'm curious, Cal, what do you think is the current state of the art speaker room EQ program available now? I've got DRAC, you've got anthem room correction, you've got Odyssey, you've got everything. I mean, there's so many options nowadays, and they're all going about it differently. Have you compared them much?
I haven't used the Anthem in a long time, but I always liked it. It's a well thought out system, and it's relatively easy to use. It is pretty conservative in terms of what they suggest you use. You know, they don't push full range EQ on you, so I've had good history with them, and I'm looking forward to trying one of the new ones maybe soon. That's not that I'm not trying to bait the hook. I'm just saying I would like to. I haven't made any efforts yet. And I love the Dirac, and I've started playing with the new one, the Dirac 3. I think that's excellent. We're talking about consumer packages, not professional
right.
DSP systems. What I particularly like about the Dirac also is that it allows for discrete control of multiple individual subwoofers, which you can't get with the ones that are being shoehorned into most processors. Odyssey was the pioneer getting this thing out into the mainstream, but they have not been innovative in quite a while. The only thing they've introduced is this app, which is really useful. I mean, I have a Marantz Pre-Pro in Connecticut, and before the newest version with the app, and the app is what makes it work. I had the Pro system before, and it was difficult to use, and it required extra boxes, and it didn't necessarily. Its major advantage was that you used a better mic with it, whereas I think if they added the facility to use your own microphone, that would help the new Odyssey system But I don't think Odyssey is going to go anywhere. I mean, the people who built it and designed it, and developed and ran it for a while are no longer associated with it at all. They've sold it off, and I don't think we're going to see it. If it wasn't for Sound United, I don't think they'd be in business. Put it this way.
What's the matter with doing it the manual way? I always get better sound if I don't rely on a program to do it, and I literally do different measurements, like with REW, and go around the room, move the subwoofers around, and do my checks that way. I seem to get better results doing it just by hand.
I have no argument with that statement. I'm certain of that. I'm just telling you from the point of view of what the consumer products are, and that's, I think, what Alan asked about. And that's mostly what I write about because that's what the readers are interested in. Most of the readers. But yes, there's no question that there are much better tools out there that a person who wants to take a hands-on approach can utilize and get much better results. I mean, it's like a lot of technology where packaging it to make it easy makes for shortcuts, and it can't be optimal.
My term is EQ for dummies.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Some people don't want to be burdened with.
I mean it in you know the book series EQ for Dummies, like
Yes, I know.
Yeah. So, but it really is intended more for home theater, not for the crowd here with the 2-channel guys. As a matter of fact, if you read Floyd Toole and all that, he's actually against that sort of thing, other than in the bass.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Are we running out of audio files, Cal?
Oh, probably, but I won't probably live long enough to be certain. You know,
But what do you think? What could Stereophile or the industry do to get more younger people involved?
you know, it's a tough thing because you have to maintain your current readership. And I know when I wanted to do music in the round, I got a lot of resistance. I proposed this. It took me 3 years for it to happen because nobody wanted, that's home theater. And John was always willing to listen to discussions, but the publishers weren't. And finally, they misplayed one of the exchanges, and they said, you know, that goes with video and home theater. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I will do this, and I promise never to discuss video. That's the province of our sister publication, and I will make sure there's no mention of video. So they sort of had to agree. And John said, fine, go ahead and do it. And throughout, I would say the first 5 years that I did it, I used to get a lot of flack from readers who say, you had the damn processor in your rack. Why didn't you say something about the video? And I said, well, I'm sort of constrained from making such comments because I had an agreement. And gradually that sort of faded away. But I still never went into video. I'm not much of a videophile to begin with. I've got stigmatism, and I've got red-green color blindness and some glaucoma that's coming along lately. So video is, I have no way of judging it. In fact, I'm a little defensive about even judging sound at an advanced age. I mean, I haven't had a hearing test in a couple of years, but I know I know the physiology. That's my business. So I'm
yeah, all of us are suffering from from that. By the time we can afford the best gear, we can no longer hear it.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, it's not only hearing, as you all know, it's listening. And every time my reviews have changed. I don't know if anyone has noticed, they've changed. I've become much less forthcoming about describing the sound with analogies to smell, taste, vision, or anything else, and much more about relating it to physical things. I hear more of this, I hear less of that. This is obscure, this is not, and I try to stick to that because I can relate that to something that I know can be measured to a great extent, or should be able to be measured. And I get enough feedback from John's measurements to reassure me I'm hearing it. I mean, I just did it's not out yet, I did a review of something where I preferred it was a streamer, and it'll be around one of these days. But the point is, I said, I could hook up all the DACs in the world that I had to it, and it didn't really sound that good. But the analog out from the built-in DAC and this little streamer was much better to my ears, and that made it a good value because you didn't have to buy a DAC or something. If this was in your price range and feature range, you go. And then John comes back with a ruse, says, the SP diff and the USB didn't measure well, but the DAC was surprisingly good. So I said, aha, I still got it for another month. So
who's going to take over when John stops doing his measurements? If he ever retires, is there somebody else he's grooming to do the measurements?
Not that I know of, but I'm not part of the management team. But I think it's essential. I think Jim Austin acknowledges it's essential. What's being done in anticipation of that, I have no idea. But I think it would be important to me for him to continue with this. It's what drew me to the magazine, and what still helps it maintain a unique place in the public world.
I think you shouldn't feel bad, Cal, because I think we're getting, in my opinion, too much of this liquidity and all the analogies that I mean, every reviewer out there regurgitates the same stuff. It's getting old.
Well, here's my response. You can say that, but I couldn't possibly comment.
Right? Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Is Jim Smith more receptive? Jim Austin more receptive to multi-channel? It seems like since you've come out of the back room there, or wherever you want to call it, and now Music in the Round is gone. And
I haven't pushed him much on it lately, but I'm going to now. I have a couple of multi-channel products I want to do, and I've done some streamers and servers, and I've been. I make a point of including their capability for doing multi-channel, which I think is important. And it's part of it should be part of it. You're going to spend a lot of money on something. It should be capable of playing whatever you want to play through it. After all, they're all basically computers. They're just pushing data around, and they should be able to handle whatever data you want it to deal with. I mean, most don't live up to it. Most have small processors in them that barely cope with the bandwidth of 2 channels. And when you start multiplying that by 3 or perhaps more, and then you add on DSP responsibilities or other things, they just simply cough at best.
We'll get to you a second, Gary. Do you all guys here, I'm sure, Cal, you're familiar with it, the AKM factory in Japan burnt down?
Yeah.
And that's a huge blow to the industry. I know even the new Anthem models, the pre-pros and the receivers are all AKM chips. I don't even know if they're going to be able to manufacture them for the rollout.
You know, I saw that, and it's a great concern. Someone suggested that most companies of that size in the industry have secondary sources. So they have another site that is either owned by them or by an affiliated company for backup purposes.
So they may have stockpiled them in advance.
Well,
for production.
Hopefully not on site.
I think I heard that it might only be down for like 6 weeks, despite the severity of the fire. It might only be like 6 weeks.
Wow.
I don't know. I was reading it said up to a year. The whole factory burnt down.
Yeah. Don't know.
Gary, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just curiosity question. I imagine you're doing all of your testing in your own home, right, Cal?
Yes.
Is that a kind of a pain in the butt to keep changing out your components?
Yes.
Yes, good. I thought so. It'd be
I mean,
good laboratory.
I mean, there are times where the choice of the next thing to review hinges on how disruptive it is.
Yeah, especially speakers, right?
Actually, speakers are the least. I mean, you just move a speaker out of the room and you put a new one in, and then you work with it. It's when you have to rewire stuff.
Yeah.
And when the system is complicated, every rewiring is although it's getting easier these days, I have shortcuts. Now that I don't have a preamp and I do everything through multi-channel balanced interconnections. The digital is relatively easy. It's one cable of one sort or another, and the analog is all multi-channel balanced interconnects. And I'm now using them all with a switcher that can allow me to connect up many sources. But it uses the, what do you call it, 24 pin. I'm trying to remember the name of it. There's a 24 pin connector.
Kind of like a patch bay of some sort.
Yeah, right. So I can rewire, although I have multiple inputs on this, and I can rewire things pretty easily because every device gets its own little snake with its multiple XLRs on one end and that connector on the other end.
But what's the best sounding patch bay you've ever? Just kidding.
It's actually just it's a Coleman. It's just a switch. It's a box of relays, sealed relays, and it has 4 8-channel inputs and 1 8-channel output. That's all it is. Yeah.
Phil, you're raising your hand.
Yeah. Have you measured the DC offset on your AC line?
No.
You'd be real. I bought a B&K unit, $120, very inexpensive thing to buy.
Yeah.
But what it'll actually do, it'll distinguish between the DC component on an AC line, if in fact it is there. Most people, kind of disregard that. But what that does is it interferes with toroidal transformers.
Mm-hmm.
And once you eliminate that, the results are amazing. I have a solar system that has an unbalanced inverter, and I have a DC component of just over 2 volts.
Mm-hmm.
But I went over to a friend's house who is plugged into the AC mains. His DC component is 2.6 volts.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, his preamp section and all of his low-level stuff is all toroidal based. And once we eliminate it, it's very simple to eliminate. But once you eliminate that, the toroids don't hum and the music comes alive. And that's
how do you eliminate it?
It's basically a bridge rectifier and back-to-back large value compactor.
Okay.
When the rectifiers turn on, then the influence of the caps is no longer there. But you have to have that forward turn on voltage high enough in order to eliminate the existing DC component. And in his house, it took 2 back-to-backs, and in mine it only took 1. It's really interesting. $120, B&K Precision.
Certainly worth looking into. It's something I've never entertained.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, just wondering, where's this DC come from? I mean, you get mains coming from the outside. Where's the DC produced?
Yeah, it's produced as a function of a miswinding in the transformer. There's an imbalance in the transformer at the pole, on the pole, and so what it does is, I mean, it's close but no cigar. And some of the work, his Brad's is the worst that I've measured, 2.6 volts.
Is that what power conditioners are supposed to be doing?
No. Power conditioners do not address that.
Yeah, I know there's an Motiba CMX2, I think it's called, that has a DC blocker of some sort. It might be something like what you're saying.
Yeah, that there are more and more components that are coming into this realm because people have found out that it is a pretty big problem.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Is it just inducing noise in the system? Is your noise floor is higher, or what exactly is the audible effect?
The audible effect is that, like, if you have a power transformer, it reduces its efficiency, its overall efficiency, because it has to overcome that residual magnetism that the DC component puts on the core.
Yep.
And so regardless of the positive or negative going phase that's going through the transformer, it has to always overcome that. And so the power level that you would expect is not the same power level that you're getting. It also interjects, as you just mentioned, noise. And what you get when you eliminate that is a very, very clean blackness background.
Cal, maybe that's something you could ask John Atkinson about measuring, or his opinions on that. He's probably familiar with that.
I'll ask him about it, but it's something worth look. I'm just for myself. It's worth looking into. I mean,
Yeah, it's easy to tell.
By the way, guys, after we had that Zoom session with Vince Galbo from MLB a couple months ago, he had suggested that noise measurement device that we bought for the club, that we need to work out a system of lending it out. Different measurement device, but still useful. AJ? You're muted.
Yeah, how did Floyd Toole's system sound compared to yours?
his system sounded superb, I have to say. It wasn't a serious assessment in the sense that it was a social event, and we were well lubricated. He's a.
All right, next question. What's his favorite drink? What was the?
Well, he had a very nice selection of wines.
Wine.
And he's an excellent cook. So yes, but the real issue was that he was very insistent on choosing what he wanted to play. So he played what he wanted to play rather than what I either was familiar with or wanted to hear. He was making points. That was what he wanted to do in his demonstration.
Mainly classical or
no, mostly pop stuff that he played.
Really?
Yeah.
What type of system did he have? What Harman speaker? I mean, JBL speakers, or what did he have?
They're Revels. Actually, you can.
Yes, the Revels. Yeah.
Aren't they stacked? Aren't they stacked?
They're yes, they're upside down. What he has is the salons, but he has them built into a wall unit so that they are like the dividers between segments. And because they are above a cabinet that's, say, desk height, he has them inverted so that the tweeters are not up near the ceiling. So it's an interesting arrangement, but it works very well. And of course, it's trying to remember now. I think it's 9 point. I don't know how many subs there were there, but it's nine in the horizontal plane, and then a couple above as well.
I thought he was up to 11.
Excuse me?
I thought he was up to 11.
Perhaps. I'm trying to do this from visual memory.
And he was doing upmixing, or was he?
He was doing both. But he was making a case for upmixing. That seemed to be his
with pop music.
Yep. What I'm telling you is he made a good case for it. My reaction was, I don't care, but I didn't say that, of course. But it was a very nice system. There were a few things he played that sounded good on it, but those things that I really liked were very brief. He was trying to make a case for upmixing using Oro 3D. With stereo sources. And from the ones he picked, the effect was advantageous. It was better. It really was. It just that I didn't care one way or the other.
Right. I can't imagine how pop music, what is it supposed to sound like? Yeah, I don't know why he wouldn't have played some classical. Now, I am a advocate for upmixing, as you know, versus discrete. And of course, I'll back it up with my AAS papers that show that, in terms of double blind testing with discrete versus upmix, it's not easy to tell. There's not necessarily an advantage over the other. Now, obviously, recording discrete is advantageous, but playing back, with stereophonic can sound as good as the discrete, at least from double blind testing with what I've seen.
Well, as I say, it was a delightful evening, and I like him a lot. But And if you were curious about the system, and John, you asked about it, he has a website of some posting where he has a complete description of the system and how it's put together. And if you can't find the link, let me know and I'll send it on.
I think it's like on AVS Forum and a couple of Audioholics has it. But I mean, if you Google it online, you'll see it. Okay, yeah. So it's well described. Yeah, I don't know what he's doing these days. He's been this is a non-audio thing. He's been traveling around a bit, and he's a newlywed, and so
He's what?
a newlywed.
A newlywed.
What happened to his wife?
I'm assuming she passed away. I mean, when I
She
saw
was very sick.
She was very sick. Yes.
His dad is still like 105 or 100 something years old.
Yeah.
He's still
Wow.
around.
Not bad.
But so he's I think a little distracted from audio these days, which is why he just pops in very rarely on.
And how many subs did he have? Is he?
I don't remember. You're going to have to look it up because they were not as obvious as some of the surrounds.
I was just going to say. So was the bass quality pretty good?
Yes, it was an extremely well-tuned system, and as several of you pointed out, it was not done with a simple consumer type, one button EQ system. It was done with the JBL synthesis stuff in there.
Cal, does your wife enjoy listening to music with you? Do you ever pick her brain on how something sounds?
Occasionally. She doesn't sit and listen with me, but she listens. It's not something that she's really interested in. She listens mostly to the system we have in the TV room, which is where she is now. And I always tell her, it's easy enough. The only time she uses the main system here is when she's having a party because it's in the room. And so we have her playlist on the server, and she turns that on. She knows how to manipulate that. That's fine. But she's just as happy listening to the surround system on the TV in the other room.
Colin?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
More or less.
One of my big questions is, what would you recommend to beginning audiophiles as an entry-level system?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I'm really not in tune with that much anymore. I've sort of become more and more specialized as I've gotten older and paid much less attention to a lot of the inexpensive stuff. And the only thing that pops into mind immediately is something that I reviewed recently, which is that NAD M33. And it's not for a beginning audiophile, but for someone who just wants a good sound system. It's it's a one box thing they can buy and pick any speakers they want. It's competent to drive almost anything, and it does most things that people want. And it has a turntable input. It has a couple other things, and it might be a jumping point for those who get the bug after they've had some good sound in-house for a while. But so far as budget components are concerned, I don't consider myself adequately informed to comment.
I think the shit audio stuff is pretty good value from what I've read. By the way, there's a book, I forget his name, one of the co-founders of Shit Audio wrote a phenomenal book. I'm halfway through it, very easy reading, fascinating insights into starting the business and some of the problems they ran into. Quite interesting.
Yeah.
So we need a Corey Greenberg again. Whatever happened to that angle?
I don't know. Well, I was never a fan of his, but that's a personal thing. Aside from, it's a very personal thing. It had nothing to do with what he wrote. It was how he wrote it. But he wasn't writing for me. So that's a different story. But I think we need more people, and Jim has actually done that. There are a lot of new names in Stereophile in the last couple of months. And it's the right thing to do. I don't know if all of them will stay. That's the case with everybody, you know, but I think it's a great thing to have new people getting a voice, getting a chance at this kind of thing. And some of it will stick. They have to find an audience. And I think that that's important to keep the magazine going. I think keeping the measurement feature is essential. And, but I can't see the future.
I know Colin had previously sent a question. I forgot to send that to you, but what were some of your best and or worst experiences as a reviewer?
Yeah, I saw that question and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. The thing is that I've been reviewing with them since '96, so a lot of the stuff has passed out of memory, and I get questions. I know that because I get letters from people asking me about something I wrote about 10, 15 years ago, and I say the only thing I can tell you is what I wrote because I can read it, because I don't remember any of that for this particular product. So it's mostly recent stuff. I think that the worst experience I had two recent ones. One was the PMC speaker, and I expected so much better out of it. It looked good. It was beautifully made, and I couldn't wait to get it out of my room. And a speaker is something that's in the room, and if it's in the room, that's what you're listening to. It's not like a alternative DAC or amplifier that you could switch in and out with moving cable. It was there, and of course I agreed to review it, and I agreed to the review, and I was happy to do it in anticipation. But I couldn't listen to it when I wasn't evaluating it. That is to say, wow. I didn't like it. And it was a sound that some people liked, and when I wanted to just in that room in Connecticut is a multi-channel home theater as well as music. That's our entertainment room, and I was stuck with that pair of speakers for weeks, and I didn't want to take my annoyance out on them. I wanted to be as objective as possible in reporting it, but it was imposing itself on me. So that was a difficult experience.
Were
and
you
another one.
Brutally honest about it?
Excuse me?
Were you brutally honest about it?
I didn't catch the verb there.
Were you brutally honest about the report?
Yeah. I've told the things that it could do. It wasn't a piece of crap in the sense that it was incapable of making any decent sounds. It just that it was a botched job, and some people will like what it did, because I've heard that before. There are a lot of brands out there that I don't like to talk about things. A lot of brands I've refused to review, but they're very successful, and some other reviewers have liked them. But this one I had hopes for. I'm biased because I'm an old-time transmission line guy. I've built a dozen or more pairs of them of varying sizes and configurations. So PMC is committed to transmission lines, so I keep on hoping that we'll find something in common. But this was a bad experience. And another recent one I had has nothing to do with the product. Didn't dislike the product. Got to tell you, it was a product that the review hasn't come out yet, so I'm not going to name it. But it was a product that was difficult to manage physically in terms of its size and weight. It's not a speaker. And it was difficult to manage operationally. I had trouble with the interfacing, with the networking, and I actually fucked it up myself, and it had to be sent back. It was my fault. I damaged it, and it was a big deal to ship back because, as I say, it was big and heavy. And I was glad to be done with it, even though it really was a nice product. If you want something big and heavy, it'll be appearing soon, and you'll see. So, I mean, that was a product that was really a good product for people who want that kind of product, and it performed. Anyway, so, but in terms of the best stuff, that's easy. You know, you see lots of stuff that you've probably seen it, that my enthusiasm is probably apparent in those cases. And I would love to, I had a grand experience with those BioLab 90s, for example. I want them. They, like, two was too big for my room. Certainly more than two would have been impossible. It was impossible, nearly impossible to get it in the doorway to my apartment, because the way you move a BioLab around is they built this little trolley for it that you fit to it in the shipping carton, and then it rolls out of the shipping carton and rolls around, and then when you get it where you want, the trolley lowers the speakers down into that spot and it goes away. So the problem is that it adds about, yes, I see, thank you, is that it adds about 2 inches to its dimensions. And those 2 inches meant that it wouldn't fit through my doorway. So the guy who installed it had to lift it over the transom, and both installing it and bringing it back. But they brought a team of people down, and everything was set up, and the designer came and helped me do the EQ, and it was a wonderful experience to get in. I actually went to B&O also before that, but it was a wonderful thing to really get inside the development and the technology behind the product. And I learned a lot about acoustics. I just had a great experience with it, even though it's not a product that I will want to have.
I wonder how many they actually sold. I can't imagine that there was much of a market for them.
No, and the prices dropped. You can buy them much less expensively. I mean,
We were at one of the shows, and I don't know how hard those are to set up with the DSP and everything, but I'll be honest with you, I don't think they got set up real well, because it was literally the worst sound at the show. It was that bad, and I was expecting like really good sound, because I'm into the DSP and things like that, and I couldn't believe it. So I don't know. They must be hard to set up.
What show, John? What show was it? What show?
I think it was Chicago, the one in Chicago.
Expona.
Expona.
Well, I heard it at CES, and I heard it at a press show here in New York, which was a small group, 30, 40 people. They rented a venue, and both of those demos were terrible.
Did you try all the 3 modes, directional modes?
Well, if it's bad in the right, the narrow mode is the one you want to use for listening.
Not me.
And if that's not good, who cares about the other 2? To be very frank.
Is part of the problem that the complexity is probably beyond the average person's ability to actually set it up to get the maximum sound?
I don't think it's that complex, although I learned it not just from the documents, but by having the designer actually in my room and step me through it. So that was very helpful. It also is that, I don't know when you heard it at Chicago, but the demo I heard in New York and at CES were both early on when the product was brand new, and the documentation, and in fact, even the software wasn't finalized. So it might have been a problem. I haven't had a chance to listen to a pair of them since the pair I had here, but I did have the benefit of having the actual designer come here and help me set it up. So I think it's a great product, and I really enjoyed the entire experience. I got to say, both spending, and I got to tell you, one of the things I enjoyed with that is that when I went to B&O to listen to it, I had no idea what the product was. I knew they had a new speaker coming out. They told me nothing about it. They made me sign an NDA with a penalty fee in it that if I disclosed anything, I would owe them something, 10,000 euros. And I'm sitting there in the dining room at B&O, and I don't want to sign that. On the other hand, I just flew to across the ocean and took a local plane and a limo, and here I am in the north end of Denmark waiting to do this. Am I going to fail to sign the NDA? And I just sort of, crossed my fingers in one hand and signed it with the other hand that I would do it. So
You
I
should
went.
have handed them one.
What?
You should have handed them one. If you didn't like it, they'd have to pay you.
Well, I was not in a good position to negotiate at that point, since I was on their turf and they had already paid for my airfare there. Anyway, what I was getting at was not that so much. That was just on the trip. When I got into the place where they were going to show it to me, I walked into this little room with a screen in front of it. In other words, half the room was blocked off. And we spent the first, I would say, 5 hours listening. 5 hours, not a small thing. I had no idea what was behind the screen. But they were my recordings. I brought my own stuff. And I listened to my own recording, not that I've made, but those that I'd selected for 5 hours. And I made notes about what it sounded like, blind. And I was very impressed. And I was stunned when they pulled away the curtains. And it was a prototype, actually, at that point. It was held together with tape and, glue gun joints and other things. But it was more or less the same shape as the final one. It's pretty much. So I thought I got a good feeling for it without knowing anything about it from that. And then for the next day and a half, we did a deep dive into the engineering, the construction, and other things. But I was impressed by the sound of it before I even saw it. And I had the basic doubt about B&O as a sound source, although there have been excellent engineers over the years. I mean, I remember the phono cartridges and other things way back when. So, but who knows? This turned out to be a delight. I enjoyed that. Probably the best experience.
Weren't they just sold out to a Chinese conglomerate or not?
Could be. They've been trying to sell the company for a couple of years. They've had the people who own it are not really hands-on owners and managers. They have a great history, but they're a design firm, really. In fact, I got pissed off. If you look in the literature for the B&O 90, the designer who's listed of record is the guy who designed the cosmetics. And what's his name? Martin. What's his first name? Or the actual engineer is not given credit for it in that sheet. It shows you what their perspective is. And what I was told was that typically they're given a physical design and a performance spec for the engineering company. They don't get to design the product how it works over the years. They're told to make it fit this. And the 90 was the first product which they were not told that. The guy who did the cosmetics came a little bit later after they'd had the prototypes. And again, it's a lot of story about something that's not hardly mainstream, but it's a fascinating product, and I have great respect for it.
Interesting. Do you how often are you doing like a review every other month now? Is that the schedule?
More or less, yeah. Depending on the the flow of things. Some things come in early. I mean, to me, but I'm talking about the Jim Austin gets reviews. Some will come early, some are delayed. There are technical problems sometimes. You can't get it in. This other product I mentioned earlier, where I actually damaged it, not physically, but the software was one where I got an extra month on that one.
How do you decide who reviews what though? Like how do you decide? How did they decide that you reviewed the PMC speakers?
In the case of the PMC, Jim suggested it to me, and I accepted it readily because of my history with it. But typically what I do, and I don't know if this applies to everybody because I don't know, we don't communicate that on that level, but I come up with things I want to do and I run them by Jim, and he says yes, no, maybe, soon, later, and that's what we do. And he also suggests things, but there's no assignment. You don't get a hard and fast designation that for your next thing you're going to, you know, this big black box is going to arrive and you're going to review whatever's in it. That never happens. At least it doesn't happen to me.
Do you have a set type? Sorry, Gary, I'll get you in a second. Do you have like a set playlist you always start with when reviewing, say, any gear, so you have that audible reference to start with?
Yeah, I do, but as I said before, it changes over time. I mean, I have a set list of things on the top page of my server that I will go to right away, and then I'll dive deeper with other things, and then I try to just forget about demonstrating anything, but just listen to music. In fact, I only have one pair of speakers in operation at any given time, and over the years, I found it very useful to just let them play. Even if I'm not in the room listening, they're playing. I walk through the room. Sometimes it catches my attention. I had to review the pair of speakers many, many years ago, and I had a real problem with them because they were good. They were okay. But as I walked through the room from one other room to another, they never caught my ear and made me come and sit down. Music was playing, but when I hear something that I like, and I like most of the music I play, not always, but I like most of the music I play, and it's sounding really good, I'll be enticed to come and sit down and forget what I was doing before and listen to the rest of the piece of music. And on these speakers, goes back a long time, that never happened. They were just kind of not quite there. They were okay. They were fine. And I actually decided, and I walked over to, I'm about 2 blocks from a Lyric Audio. I don't know if you've heard of New York, long time audio shop in New York. They're about 2 blocks from here. I walked in there and I said, what's in the big room now? And they said, oh, I said, can I have about 20 minutes? I just want to clean my ears. I want to know if it's me or something else. It almost didn't matter as long as it was something good, decent. And I don't even remember what it was, but it tells me, oh yeah, that sounds fun. Go back home. Yeah, these are just kind of dull. They're just not lively. They don't have dynamics.
And that place is still, you still have a stereo shop in New York, right?
We actually, in Manhattan, we have 1, 2, 3, 3 decent ones. We used to have more, and I don't know how much they're selling of high-end stuff. Lyric does a fair amount too.
Gary, you had your hand up?
There's something called the next room effect. It's good, great speaker sounds fine in the next room as well.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're someplace and then there's live music playing somewhere other room. I was just going to ask, is sound and vision part of the stereophile empire?
Yeah.
I tried to write, I wrote a note to him to ask if it's possible to submit an article, and I never got an answer.
To whom?
Who's the editor?
It used to be Rob Saban. But it's now been reorganized twice since then. And I don't know what their publication schedule is. I don't know how lively they are these days. The only contact I have there is with Tom Norton, who writes for them. So I don't know what their editorial policy is.
But anyway, is it possible to submit articles to these magazines sometimes?
Yeah, it is.
I assume that I have to ask permission to send it in first, and then if he says yes, I would send it in.
I would think that's probably the right thing to do.
I would say no. I would say no. In the enjoythemusic.com and the Freshwater Marine Aquarium magazines that I wrote for, and Marine Fish Monthly and Aquarium Fish Monthly, They want to see a sample of your writing. So the best thing to do is write a review that has been critiqued and polished and checked and rechecked, so that it's ready to be printed just the way that they're going to print it, so they can see exactly how it is you're going to write a review for them. And if they love it, they'll print it. Otherwise, you know, you call them up and say, do you want a review? They'll, you know, it's much easier for them to say no. They don't know you. They don't know how you write. They don't know how you review. They don't know why you want a review for them. You're much better off doing some reviews of product on your own and writing up an actual article ready to be published, edited, proofed, double checked, grammar checked, you know, peer reviewed if you can get some friends to look at it, and then submit it. And then they go, oh, this guy is serious. Yeah, you know, let's print this stuff.
Yeah, I've written before.
Yeah, that might be right. I mean, I when I started at Stereophile, I asked John if he'd be interested in a review of a product I had that nobody else had. And he said, well, you know, you could write it and I'll read it, but that's all I'm committing to. So that's how I got started. But the Colin's advice is probably good. That it's hard to ignore something that's sitting right in front of you, and especially if it's on a topic that's of relevance, and if it's polished and ready to go, it becomes very attractive.
Gary, would that be a review you would propose to write, or presenting your theory of speakers and direct and reflective sound?
I've got a new video projector. Hello? I've got a new video projector, and I've been searching how you can take the throw ratios and tell, based on the screen size that you want, how far back you need to put it. And there's a range of distances that you can figure out, and it's very mathematical, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. So I thought it would be useful to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who's running Sound and Vision, but you know, I can get in touch with them to find out who would be the right person to send it to if you want.
I'm looking right now, trying to find where I sent that to. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So if you want to, you know, send me your email address or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to publish it, but Alan knows what it is.
Yeah, darn, I can't find it. Anyway, thank you.
Any final, we're coming up on 2 hours here, Cal.
Oh.
Do you want to kind of, any additional thoughts you'd like to share while you have the floor here?
No, but I'm just glad that you guys are still interested and excited. It's especially in these days of the pandemic, it's hard to connect with people who share same enthusiasm. I have a little group here in New York, not an audio society, but a handful of friends. We used to meet for dinner every month. A couple of guys who write for, some of them write for one of them writes for Audioholics and for another publication, but the other couple of guys are just neighborhood friends. But we're all into the same stuff, and it makes life much more interesting to be able to share your passions with like-minded people. So I appreciate the opportunity to spend the evening with you guys, and I'm glad you're out there carrying on the enthusiasm.